So now we need to talk about these things called organizational units, or sometimes just simply referred to as OUs, because organizational unit is a mouthful if you have to say it a lot. So basically, to understand organizational units, everything in Active Directory, so all things contained within Active Directory are called objects. Okay, we have all these objects within the Active Directory database. An organizational unit is a container for those objects. Now, besides OUs, there are also some built-in containers. And when we get to the actual operating system itself, when we get in a couple lessons from now and we go in and install Active Directory, I will show you these built-in containers, and then I'll also be, of course, be showing you how to create additional OUs. Now, besides certain built-in containers that are similar to OUs, we also have the domain itself, which is a form of a built-in container, right? A domain is a container. It's the highest level of container, so to speak. It's the core administrative unit. It's the core container. Okay, so you're going to want to understand that concept, the concept of containers and then objects within those containers. And I promise you, if you're confused at all right now, it will all make sense once we get into the operating system and look at it. But over here on the right, I have a picture of one of my domains that I had set up for globalmantics.local and some of the containers. So you'll notice, as for instance, here we have client computers. And inside of that, there's a hierarchical fashion to this. I've got the different locations: Chicago, Dallas, New York, and Tokyo. So that's maybe where the client computer objects would be stored for each of those locations. You'll notice here there is the computers container. That's a built-in container. And again, we're going to talk about this in more detail, but that is where computers will go by default, or computer objects will go by default, if you don't specify where they need to go. So it really all comes down to how specific you want to get with things like that. Likewise, you'll see here we have user accounts. We've got that broken down into Chicago, Dallas, New York, and Tokyo. And then to take that a step further, I've shown you, and now each of these locations could be expanded, but I only expanded the one here for New York to show you that we're going to go ahead and break those users down into our contractors versus our full-time users versus our part-time users. And then again, you'll notice here's that users container built in. So we'll come back to this in much more detail when we get into the operating system, but an organizational unit is a container. Now, OUs serve three main purposes. One, well, just flat out keep objects organized, right? You can see from the way I have everything structured on the right, well, this is just a matter of organizing our objects, making them easy to find, or at least in a sensible location. But another purpose to our OUs is for the delegation of administrative permissions. In other words, I'd mentioned that the domain is the core administrative unit. Well, as we'll learn in a later lesson, we can break down those administrative permissions, delegate them out to different people over different areas of our network. So as a for instance, maybe I have a local IT person in the Chicago office who is responsible for desktop support for the Chicago computers. Well, then I may go ahead and delegate some appropriate permissions to that administrator over the Chicago OU container. And then, of course, all the objects inside of it. Now, the third purpose to OUs is for the managing of group policy application. There I go, throwing another term out there that we haven't talked about. You'll see later in this course, I have a series of lessons that are going to be all about something called group policy. Group policy is how we keep control over our environment. Well, you will learn that these group policies are applied at different levels in the Active Directory hierarchy, one of those levels being the organizational unit level. So again, maybe there are some settings that I want to have in place specifically on all the client computers in the Chicago office. Well, again, group policy may be applied to that Chicago client computer OU. Now, I don't want you to fret over any of this because I'm really kind of throwing a ton at you all at once. We are going to come back and revisit all of this in detail as we go through this course.